The basis for sanctioning Iran? Extreme measures, huh? So the key here is, do they dare to sanction the Beijing regime that's backing Iran behind the scenes? And my conclusion today is yes, they do. Why am I so sure about this? Alright, listen to Fang Wei explain it to you in detail. Also, the trade negotiations between the US and Canada have broken down, and I have a pretty good idea of what the real reason is. This is the answer I will bring to you today. Alright, welcome to Good Morning America, brought to you by Fang Wei. Hello to our friends watching on YouTube, and hello to our listeners on Sound of Hope Silicon Valley FM 96.1. Alright, let's get straight to the point. Yesterday afternoon at 2 o'clock p.m., U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent officially announced what he called a Normandy landing-level economic sanction against Iran. It has a code name, like a military campaign, called Operation Economic Outcast, which means to turn Iran into a kind of a pariah or exile. That's the idea. So this code name is similar to a military campaign, right? Like military campaigns called Fury of the Apocalypse, Operation Apocalypse Fury. Anyway, this one is called Economic Outcast, and its goal is very clear. In one sentence, to cut off every economic lifeline that sustains this tyrannical regime. Alright, let's go into the details. The entire sanctions package is divided into 6 aspects. First, the sanctions cover 5 major industries. The first is cryptocurrency, the second is gold, the third is technology, the fourth is aviation, and the fifth is shipping. So these sanctions are different from traditional ones. Traditional sanctions usually involve picking out specific targets, and once that list is made, those are the subjects of the sanctions. This time it's about touching. The U.S. has announced 5 major industries, which means that as long as you touch upon these 5 industries, regardless of which country or institution you are, you will automatically face U.S. secondary sanctions, including the loss of what's called access rights to the U.S. financial system. What does access rights to the U.S. financial system mean? This is because the U.S. financial system is the most widely used financial system in the world. Excluding you from the U.S. financial system is almost like excluding you from modern life today. We all remember when the former chief executive of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, was, because back in August 2020, due to her what you call suppressing the anti-extradition bill protests, she was sanctioned by the U.S. State Department. At that time, she and 11 other Hong Kong government officials, 11 people in total, couldn't even collect their salaries. They had to take them home in checks. Carrie Lam's annual salary back then was 4.7 million Hong Kong dollars, and she had to carry it home in cash, literally hauling bundles of banknotes home. Why? Because all the banks in Hong Kong under the CCP's control, not just HSBC, not just Standard Chartered, but also the Bank of China, China Construction Bank, and China Merchants Bank in Hong Kong, none of them dared to open an account for Carrie Lam. This is what U.S. financial access is like, you see. It's incredibly powerful. So now, this so-called Bessent-style sanction, this extreme sanction, shifts the compliance burden onto financial institutions worldwide. You must ensure you haven't touched anything related to Iran, or even brushed against any corner of it. Otherwise, you'll be sanctioned. That's the first aspect, the 5 major industries. Then second, there's still a list with over 60 entities, individuals, and ships designated, including 4 Chinese nationals and 20 Chinese and Hong Kong enterprises. These 4 Chinese nationals are named Li Na, Tian Jianbai, Qu Xin Yu, and Zhang Li Mei. Of course, I don't know who they are, but since the Americans have said so, we'll just list their names. Well, in that case, at the very least, the people around them will know, right? And furthermore, regarding the assistance in procuring technology for Iran's nuclear weapons and missiles, cyber warfare, as well as the generation and laundering of oil revenue and so on, all related enterprises have been sanctioned. So this sanction includes a procurement network spanning the Middle East and East Asia, composed of over 20 entities and individuals. And where does it span across? The UAE, Hong Kong, China, Singapore, Switzerland, and Europe. This includes middlemen, shell companies, and also the tankers of the Shadow Fleet. Right, and third, they've released 30 cryptocurrency addresses, spanning Bitcoin, Ethereum, and also Thorchain, 3 chains. Right, and fourth, there are banking measures. Any entity that launders money for Iran will be kicked out of the US dollar system. In this regard, Iran's largest state-owned bank, called Bank Melli, must close every one of its overseas branches. There are at least 16 in total. So Iran can no longer conduct any financial operations overseas. And fifth, there's the timeline. Besson said that every country has a clear deadline, a timeline to shut down the activities we've identified. Besson said, we've investigated every node, every link, every entity, everything involved is within the scope of our sanctions. It means that just like in a war, the battle map is crystal clear. We know exactly where the targets are, what role they're playing. Besson has a crystal clear grasp of it all now. And then Besson said, if they don't take action by the deadline, we will take unilateral action according to the Treasury Department's authority. We'll just deal with you directly. And then, basically, as for when the final deadline actually is, I can't tell you. Why? Because this approach uses something called quiet diplomacy, communicating privately. And who's the person doing the communicating? The main person doing the communicating, this person's name is Donald Trump. Donald has personally called world leaders over the past 2 days, telling them to fall in line. This is your deadline. You stop and terminate your dealings with Iran. So, who are the main targets of these calls? They're the CCP, Russia, Turkey, Pakistan, and so on. Right, and of course, the reporters were very concerned, so they asked, because if you don't sanction Chinese banks, there's no way you can sanction Iran, right? He always leaves a back door for everyone. So the reporter asked Besson, will you sanction Chinese banks? Besson said, he put it this way, no one is exempt from U.S. sanctions. But he refused to provide a timeline for targeting China, saying only that we give everyone a chance to correct their misconduct. All right, the core declaration of the entire sanctions policy is that Besson's previous statement was even more direct. He put it this way. He said, this will work on Iran, and we will make this regime collapse. Wow, this is a classic, which you'd call subduing the enemy without fighting. You know, after I wrote about related topics on Iran on X, quite a few people commented saying, what are you sanctioning? You sanction Cuba, you sanction North Korea. Has sanctioning anyone ever worked? Isn't this a long-term, decades-long thing? Can you really subdue the enemy without fighting? Well, that's the unique aspect of this time, I suppose. Besson showed strong, what you might call enthusiasm and confidence. He said he could get this done. Of course, circling back to the point, does he dare? Does he dare to go after the Bank of China? If the Bank of China is still helping Iran, would he dare to go after them? Many people say that the U.S. actually doesn't dare to do it. Well, Radio France International just published an article, and it was clear. It explicitly questioned it, meaning it doesn't think the U.S. dares to do it. So it brings up the question, why did Besson refuse to release the list of countries targeted for sanctions? To which Besson replied, why would I want to collapse the global financial system? He said he hopes to give the relevant countries and companies some time to gradually cut off their ties with Iran. So RFI, citing experts, though it didn't specify which experts, stated that before Trump holds talks with Xi Jinping next month, Washington has concerns that sanctioning Chinese banks could trigger retaliation from Beijing. Among these, China's restrictions on the export of critical minerals could especially become a sensitive issue. What does that mean? What he means, let me help translate this RFI statement, is that since they didn't name any names, I think it's highly likely that this is RFI's own opinion. They cite some experts without even saying which ones. And what they're saying is that with the Trump-Xi meeting coming up soon, Trump won't actually do anything to Chinese banks. And the CCP has what's called rare earths, using rare earths to retaliate. So their conclusion is that they wouldn't dare. The U.S. wouldn't dare. What do you think? You think they would dare or not? What does everyone think? Would they dare? Would the U.S. dare to sanction Chinese banks, the ones that dare to do business with Iran? If Chinese banks continue doing business with Iran, I believe the U.S. will definitely impose sanctions. Why do I say that? Why put it that way? Because let me share my reasoning with everyone. Because although the CCP is helping Iran, they haven't put it on the table. On the surface, they are still cooperating with the U.S. because they don't want to have a falling out with the U.S. over just Iran. So on the surface, they are cooperating, and underneath, of course, they are secretly helping. But if they get caught, the CCP's current excuse is that it's just private business. For example, with large amounts of fuel for Iranian missiles being shipped to Iran, if caught, the CCP just claims it's private business, selling raw chemical materials, and that it has nothing to do with them. When it was revealed that the CCP provided intelligence to Iran, allowing Iran to strike U.S. troops in Jordan, the CCP claimed it was just private information sharing, that it was open source, that they got it from open source systems, and that we weren't involved. Simply put, on the issue of Iran, the CCP is, in 4 words, feigning compliance while acting in opposition. The U.S. sees this, and since you don't dare to burn bridges, I'll go all out. Whatever underhanded tactics you use, I'll deal with them openly. So if your banks and institutions cross my red lines, my sanctions red lines, I will sanction you immediately. I believe that Besant will do exactly that. Under these circumstances, the CCP, well, I don't think they'll have the nerve to confront this head on. First of all, it wouldn't look good, because they've never openly opposed Trump's actions against Iran. And in reality, most importantly, would the CCP really be willing to sacrifice the entire U.S.-China relationship for the sake of Iran? So of course, Besant said he wouldn't let this matter disrupt the global financial market. What he said makes sense too. But what he meant was that he would give the other side time. It doesn't mean he won't deal with the CCP side. And as for the CCP, they wouldn't be willing to sacrifice the entire U.S.-China relationship either. What do you call this? What is this called? A game of chicken, right? Both sides have their own concerns. When 2 armies meet, the brave one wins. Whoever's bolder will come out on top. So that's the current situation. I think Besant and Trump are willing to step up. They dare to push forward. Besides, Xi Jinping is about to visit the U.S. soon. In fact, when Xi Jinping is visiting the U.S., if he had to agree to certain things back in Beijing, would he dare not agree to them while in Washington? So I think this time, the U.S. dares to take action against the CCP's banks, or rather in areas where the U.S. has caught them, the CCP will be forced to back down or pull back from Iran. Of course, my view might be wrong. What I said earlier is just my logic, so let's wait and see if it actually turns out that way. Alright, after announcing the sanctions, Besant said that those who stand with the United States will reap the rewards of our cooperation. Those who tie themselves to Tehran should expect to fall into isolation along with this increasingly decaying regime. So anyone who helps the United States, the U.S., will, well, give them some perks. That's the meaning I'm reading into it. But what exactly are those perks? He didn't say, but there are perks. Otherwise, there would definitely be severe punishment. That's the situation. Alright, next I'll talk about what the real reason might be for the trade breakdown between Canada and the United States. Let's start with what Carney already said a couple of days ago. He said there are basically 2 reasons for the breakdown in negotiations. First, the other side wants to restrict our foreign treaties. We all know now that he's talking about China, the treaties and cooperation between Canada and China. In other words, to be more specific, it concerns the steel and aluminum that China exports to Canada. These imports from China are suspected of being transshipped to the U.S., and the U.S. requires that any country, including Canada, must melt down and recast any Chinese steel they import for it to count. Since you won't agree to that, then I won't agree. This is what Carney was talking about. They have these restrictions on us, which infringes on our sovereignty, so we're not doing it. Secondly, he mentioned something about what they call restricting our language and culture. I said yesterday that I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I've looked it up now. What he was talking about was the French-speaking region of Quebec, Canada. Any product sold in Quebec, Canada has to be bilingual in English and French. So this is their requirement. If you want to make money off me, you have to provide it to me in both languages. But American manufacturers find this really annoying, having to set up a whole new production line just for such a small region. As you all know, for mass-produced goods, the packaging isn't just a simple matter of slapping on a sticker or some glue. It requires setting up an entirely new production line. So that's one thing. The second thing is that foreign platforms, like American information platforms like Netflix or Disney, if they want to enter Canada, first, they have to fund and support Canadian local content creation. Second, they have to comply with what's called discoverability rules. What does that mean? It means your algorithms have to prioritize recommending Canadian content and French language content. So the U.S. says, that's nonsense. How can you do that? This is just a trade barrier, right? What's more, you're asking our companies to pay to fund their own competitors in Canada, so they're not having it. And because they're not having it, from Carney's perspective, this has turned into a situation where the U.S. is trying to restrict Canada's language and culture. So listen, if what I just described is the reality, is this really the US trying to restrict Canada's language and culture? It's more like they're stopping Canada from restricting its own language and culture, right? Of course, language and culture are just one aspect. The main reason for the breakdown in negotiations is the previous point. So what exactly is going on? Well, the U.S. Trade Representative, Leitzer, went on CNBC yesterday and detailed the inside story of why the talks fell apart, sharing his perspective. How should I put it? He said the whole sequence of events after Trump initiated the global tariffs last year, Canada was the first to retaliate against the U.S. In Canada, they banned the sale of U.S. wine and U.S. liquor, restricted the quota for U.S. auto exports to Canada, and even earlier, they were blocking U.S. dairy products from being sold in Canada. And then, he said we negotiated with them for over a year, but Canada ignored our demands. So later, the U.S. had no choice but to impose targeted tariffs covering 5% of Canada's exports to the U.S., which is the $20 billion figure that was mentioned. Greer said, "We have been quite restrained." As it turns out, over a month ago, he said Canada took the initiative to reach out and ask for negotiations. So the U.S. said, "All right, let's talk then." He said we showed plenty of good faith. Steel and aluminum tariffs were cut directly, slashed from 50% to 25%, and they also significantly reduced automotive tariffs, though he didn't specify exactly how much they were cut, from 25%. He said even for what Canada is most sensitive about, which is called soft lumber, they even offered concessions on that. Greer made it very clear, saying that we've been quite a good friend to Canada, offering them the most favorable access conditions of any country in the world. He said that by last Tuesday night, we were just one step away from a deal. Basically, everything had been agreed upon. But at the last minute, Canada overturned what was negotiated, raised demands, scrapped the plan, and threatened to walk. He said we couldn't agree, as we'd already given them the best terms. Greer's point was, you sought the deal, got the best terms in the world, and in the end, you were the ones who flipped the table and walked away. The key question is, why? The reporter asked, well, why? Greer said, it's very strange. It just doesn't make any sense economically. Of course, Carney said it was for national integrity, but Greer said it was probably for politics, for the election. He mentioned a term, by-election, probably is for the by-election. Is that really it? On July 26th of last month, Canadian Prime Minister Carney did indeed announce that Canada would hold a by-election. This by-election will take place at the end of this month, on August 31st, to fill 3 seats. 2 of them are currently held by the Liberal Party, and both individuals have either resigned or been reassigned to other official positions, so they need to be filled by a by-election. 2 of the seats were previously held by the Liberal Party, and 1 was held by the Conservatives. The Conservative seat is in Quebec, the French-speaking region of Canada. So this situation has made Carney very nervous. Why? Because right now in Canada's Parliament, which has 343 seats in total, the Liberal Party currently holds only 172 seats, and the threshold for a majority is exactly 172 seats. In other words, Carney cannot afford to lose a single one of those 2 Liberal seats. If he loses even one, he will fall back into being a minority government. If it falls into a minority government, it means that for the Canadian Parliament's budget, the majority party's budget, and every piece of legislation, they will have to negotiate terms with the opposition parties. So in this situation, is it like this is Greer's speculation, that by finding an issue to take a hard line with the U.S. and demonstrating Trump's tough stance against the U.S., he can gain public support and therefore win these 3 elections? Of course, what are the actual poll results? The polls haven't been conducted yet, or at least from what I've checked, they haven't been done, because it only just ended 3 or 4 days ago, so the poll results aren't out yet. So the question here is this: did Carney, in order to play the U.S., find an excuse to manufacture a situation where negotiations had to break down for the sake of national interest so that he could secure his congressional majority in the by-elections? That is what Greer is implying. So I want to ask everyone here, let's run a poll. What do you all think? Do you think do you think Carney pulling out of the Canada-US trade negotiations was truly for Canada's benefit or for his party's benefit? Especially our Canadian friends. You can vote and let us know. Do you think what I'm saying, what should I call it? This logical reasoning, is it sound? Yeah. And the start date for Canada's dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs is September 8th, while the by-election is on August 31st. If, say, the Liberals win the by-election, and then before September 8th, Carney comes back and caves, then I think, well, then what I said must be for the party's benefit. Since he's already won the election, it doesn't matter anymore, coming back to bow down. Let's wait and watch for a few more days. Of course, this is just my speculation. I could be wrong. I'm simply making an inference based on Greer's perspective on the negotiations and the hints he's provided. So I'd like to hear what our audience friends, especially our Canadian audience friends, think. As for what was mentioned earlier about language and culture, the U.S. doesn't want to be constrained by Canada's language and culture, while Carney says they are constraining our language and culture. Why does Carney insist on this? Perhaps because Quebec has always pushed for independence, forcing Carney to appease them. Appeasing Quebec means conceding to French language demands. Since the U.S. wants to export to Canada, it's forced to make concessions too. American manufacturers would naturally ask, why should the U.S. make concessions for just one of your provinces? Can't we, in the U.S., play the same game? If you want to sell in Colorado, you have to redo your label. If you want to sell in Florida, you have to redo your label. I'm negotiating this with you as a federal government. This is about imports, after all. So in both of these situations, the focus is really on domestic political needs rather than actually doing business. All right, next is Feng Wei's commentary, my commentary. I feel that what follows is my own perspective. Honestly, I think that in international trade, the U.S. is very generous and open-minded. The U.S. really has very few trade barriers. Even Western countries like Canada, which are considered quite decent, have many restrictions on free trade, both internally and externally, including those imposed on Americans. Americans have never cared. They don't care because they are generous and wealthy, and they always feel like the big brother who should look out for all the little brothers. It wasn't until the U.S. started to decline, or rather, until today, or until Trump became president, that they started to push back. This is what I believe is the real reason behind the current U.S.-Canada trade negotiations. All right, do you agree with my point of view? Well, it's fine if you don't agree. It's possible I've misjudged the situation. I made two very important inferences earlier. One is that Besant dares to sanction the CCP's banks, and the second is that Carney might have staged this whole flipping the table and walking out drama because of domestic political reasons. So, do you agree? All right, let's take a look at a few major changes in the U.S. that are very relevant to the Chinese community. U.S. State Department spokesperson Tommy Pickett stated on Monday that the U.S. government is planning what could be the largest visa revocation operation in U.S. history, targeting up to 200,000 foreign nationals who have applied for asylum status. What does that mean? Why? The State Department official said that some immigrants come to the U.S. for short-term visits on business visas or tourist visas, business visas or B-1 visas, and tourist visas or B-2 visas, and then apply for political asylum while they are in the U.S. Then, Pickett said, there's a clear premise for issuing these types of visas, which is that they're issued to people who intend to return to their home countries. So, since they aren't going back, this is considered fraud, which is why their visas are being revoked. She said that the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security are currently reviewing all B-1 and B-2 visas. Previously, the Trump administration had already been continuously tightening immigration policies. Let me walk you through a few of the steps. First, as you may recall, the State Department mentioned earlier this month that they have already revoked nearly 180,000 visas, primarily targeting immigrants who have committed crimes in the U.S., violated visa terms, or engaged in activities that the government has deemed a threat to national security. Additionally, following the death of Charlie Kirk, some international students and immigrants made inappropriate comments, which subsequently led the State Department to revoke their visas. Third, the government has also taken action to tighten asylum rules, significantly lowering the current approval rate for political asylum. Fourth, earlier this month, U.S. President Trump signed an executive order targeting birthright citizenship. Although the Supreme Court did not overturn birthright citizenship, Trump used an executive order to put an end to these so-called maternity tourism agencies and the like. Fifth, President Trump also proposed charging a fee of over $100,000 for H-1B work visa applications and also charging international students who wish to work in the U.S. after graduation. I'll talk about this news in a moment. So the latest thing is this, including the 200,000 people who come into the U.S. on B-1 or B-2 visas and then apply for political asylum. Oh, what do you think about this? Let me quickly share my comments. I cannot agree with this approach by President Trump. What is the reason? Because the assumption behind this approach is that all asylum claims are fake. It's true that many asylum claims are fake, but there are also many that are genuine. Because the CCP is truly, and I'm just talking about Chinese people here, the CCP is truly persecuting people, and that is a real thing. So what are people supposed to do when they're persecuted? They have to have somewhere to run to. They have to have somewhere to escape to. If they want to escape to the US, can everyone just take the walk the line route? Besides, those who take the walk the line route face the same situation. So many people do indeed come to the US on tourist or business visas, and only after they arrive do they apply for political asylum. Why? Because the US is truly a safe haven for prisoners of conscience, a place where they can find refuge. This is a good thing about the US, not a flaw. So the U.S., I think the Trump administration needs to differentiate on this point. They can't just paint everyone with the same brush. Anyway, I know many Chinese people are very anxious right now. What I'm talking about here are those who are genuine political asylum seekers. But I think ultimately, I believe the Trump administration will sort them out in an orderly manner. Right now, it kind of feels like they're just lumping everyone together. Because maybe it's because of the emergency situation before the midterm elections, but I think in the medium to long term, in the long run, I believe the Trump administration will eventually sort it all out. All right, regarding this policy, the cancellation of the 200,000 visas, it still has to go through a public comment period of over a month, and there's also the possibility of it being challenged in court. So feel free to leave a comment. Do you support the Trump administration's approach? If you support it, why? And if you oppose it, just write oppose and tell us why. The next one is very relevant to many Chinese people. Last year, President Trump announced that H-1B work visa applicants from abroad would have to pay $100,000. As a result, this was challenged in court and blocked by the judge. How was it blocked? The reason is that this is essentially a disguised tax, and in the U.S., levying taxes is the responsibility of Congress. The executive branch can't impose taxes on its own. Then President Trump appealed, saying, absolutely not. How is this a tax? This is just our way of managing our borders and managing the foreigners entering our country. Yeah, this lawsuit is still ongoing. Then, just recently, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, submitted a new document on Monday, planning to impose a fee of $103,265 on new H-1B visa applicants. And this fee must be paid at the time of application before the government makes a decision on approval. We all know that the H-1B is a visa for high-tech foreign professionals, and it's also the main pathway for foreigners to work in the U.S., as well as the most common and viable route for international students in the U.S. to pursue a green card after graduation. So I actually went through this H-1B, F1 to H-1B, and then got my green card. That's the path I took. Many of our viewers have gone down the same path. I think this system is actually really good. It originated from the 1965 Immigration Act. That reform was 30% good and 70% bad. This is the good part because it helps the U.S. attract the best and brightest from around the world. This is because it's meant for work visas, so top-tier talent like Elon Musk stayed here on an H-1B. The CEO of Zoom, the CEO of Google, and the CEO of IBM, etc., all stayed here on H-1B visas and later got their green cards and became citizens. So it really does attract the best and brightest from around the world. Because if American universities or graduate schools trained these people and then they all went back, that would be a loss for the U.S. So the H-1B visa provided them with a path to stay. But what are the downsides? The downside is that this system has also faced a lot of criticism, with claims that employers use this visa to hire foreigners cheaply, paying salaries lower than what Americans with similar qualifications would expect. To be honest, when I was in Silicon Valley and on an H-1B, my salary wasn't lower than that of Americans. However, there are many cases now where a disproportionate number of people are being hired at low wages, specifically from India, and they account for the vast majority of the 85,000 H-1B spots. So this is being abused by some people, especially Indians. So why is it that when you apply for an H-1B in the U.S. now, the rule last year was that if you applied from overseas, you didn't have to pay that $100,000. But, of course, that was blocked. So now, when is this $103,265 fee required? It has to be paid even if you're applying within the U.S. So why is it $103,265? This number isn't just something that was, pulled out of thin air. There's a reason for it, and I'll explain the logic behind it to you all. It takes the total cost of immigration-related operations across 6 U.S. departments: USCIS, the Department of Justice's Immigration Courts, the Department of Labor, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, the State Department, and Customs and Border Protection, CBP, which adds up to $8.8 billion. And for the H-1B visa, it's 85,000 people, right? So $8.8 billion divided by 85,000 comes out to $103,265 per person. And what does that mean? What's the point here? The point is that the H-1B is highly sought after. Employers want it, and the applicants want it too. It's a benefit. Since you want this benefit, you should pay for it. It means the money you pay allows us to support the entire immigration agency, so the U.S. government doesn't lose money on this. Although, of course, the logic might also become the subject of a lawsuit. This role will definitely be taken to court. It will certainly be criticized in court, saying, look, this, what do you call it? All the work that the immigration agency does, only a small part is related to H-1B. So how can you make H-1B applicants pay for all of it? But the Trump administration's logic is like this: we can't keep losing money, keep losing. The U.S. national debt is now $4 billion, so many of the Trump administration's actions have one motive: to reduce the national debt, to reduce the federal deficit. So since you want H-1B so much, both employers and employees want it, then you guys should pay for it. Once you pay, it balances our immigration budget, helping us pay off those debts. No, not pay off debts. Pay the costs that can reduce the accumulation of our national debt. So actually, from what Trump calls the Trump Gold Card, including Musk's Doge initiative back then, cutting USAID, cleaning up welfare, including clearing it out, and cracking down on things like fraud, all of this is for the sake of the U.S. national debt. The U.S. national debt issue is arguably one of the biggest problems for the Trump administration right now.